You don't have to call me Dr. Hall, by the way.
Okay. All right. I'm David Rice. I have a Substack called Hit Christian. I'm here with KrisAnne Hall today, and she is a constitutional attorney. She received her bachelor's degree in biochemistry from Blackburn College. She has a how do you pronounce it? Is that juris or jury?
Juris.
Juris, okay. I have an English major. You think I would know that?
Yeah, it's
From the
okay. It's Latin, so it
Yeah,
wouldn't be covered in English.
that's right. From the University of Florida College of Law, she served in the U.S. Army as a military intelligence cryptologic linguist and was a prosecutor for the state of Florida for nearly a decade. I heard you speak about 3 months ago, and you talked about how you worked with the Tea Party and how that caused some problems with your job, and they didn't really care for you working with the Tea Party.
Yeah.
And so that led you to doing this shift in your career, and now you're
Yeah, it
working.
actually led to me being fired.
Yes, yeah, that was a
The
nice way of
shift
saying
makes
it.
it sound like maybe I chose that. I mean, you know the story, so there was a choice in it, but
Yeah.
it was more of an ultimatum.
Mhm.
You give up your rights and keep your paycheck, or quit. And I refused to quit, so he fired me.
No, I kind of get that. Not to get in my own backstory, but I was a whistleblower once for a school I worked for, and so
Nice.
I understand that kind of perspective. So I wanted to bring you on to talk about the 25th and the 12th Amendment in
Mhm.
relationship to what's going on with Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, and President Biden, and just discuss what a lot of people have been saying in the media. I know that you've been trying to cover it, and a lot of people have been misquoting the 25th Amendment or talking about it in a way that's
Yeah.
inaccurate. And
Right.
towards the end of the interview, we'd like to talk about school choice too.
Okay, sounds great.
So on the 25th Amendment, what is it exactly? If you could just explain that. And I do have it pulled up if we want to do a screen share too.
Oh, yeah, great. Well, the 25th Amendment is the procedure for replacing the president when something happens to the president.
Oh, is it
Uh,
showing or is it showing something else?
yeah.
Sorry. I thought I was pulling
Oh,
up the right screen. Let me
yeah.
see. That should be the right screen. Okay. Do you see the 25th Amendment now?
Yes, I
All
think
right.
so.
There we go.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Go
this
ahead.
is, I can't see it. It's pretty
It's
far
too
away from my screen. Is it an overview or the actual
It's the
text?
overview of the 25th Amendment. It's
Okay.
on Constitution Anointed. So it's a constitution.congress.gov. So that's where I went to
Yeah,
grab it.
yeah. You have to be very careful about those explanations because a lot of times the explanations have some kind of a
Agenda.
agenda, and
Yeah.
so I like to stick with what's actually the text. But from from an understanding of the 25th Amendment, the 25th Amendment is the procedure by which the president is replaced if the president can no longer be president. If the president is removed, if the president dies, or if the president resigns or is deemed incompetent. And so the 25th Amendment lays out how the replacement happens and the progression of who takes the president's place.
Okay. So when we're talking about someone like Biden, and we're all concerned that he has mental health problems, there's more confirmations that have been coming out this weekend that he also had a medical emergency in Las Vegas, and no one's really discussing what that was, though there was some early talk about that incident. So what would it require, or what kind of event would it take for us to determine that he is no longer fit for office?
Well, the 25th Amendment outlines that the president, the vice president, and the executive offices can d- issue a declaration of incompetency, but then the House and the Senate come together in a majority vote to deem him incompetent. So it's very, very similar to an impeachment process.
Mhm.
In impeachment, the House files the articles of impeachment, the Senate holds the trial, and depending on how the Senate judges, then the president or any other officer of the federal government is then impeached. With the 25th Amendment, Congress is really in charge. Although it says that the vice president and the executive branch, it also says that Congress can declare who is fit to determine the fitness of the president of the United States. So if Congress actually believes that the president is not fit and there's no one in his administration willing to step out and make that declaration,
Mhm.
which I would think be the logical position. Why would you throw your president under the bus,
Yeah.
especially the way our political duopoly works these days? But the Congress could come together and say, okay, well, we're going to have the Secretary of Health, we're going to have someone else make that determination for the president. As a matter of fact, the Congress could actually find an independent physician, sort of like they do independent counsel, to make that determination. But the final determination would have to be made by a majority vote of both houses.
And one of the things when I was reading it, it seemed to say that the president also has an opportunity to uh, come back and say, I am fit, that he has a chance for rebuttal. Is that correct?
Right. There's always a chance for rebuttal, but again, it does follow that process, and the president's rebuttal is not final.
Okay. So it could take, they said 21 days, is that right? So there's this process of going back and forth over a minimum of maybe a month's process, right? So this
Yes,
isn't a fast process at all.
no, no, and you don't want it to be. I
No.
mean, because here's the position. I think sometimes the as a population, we get sort of wrapped up in the emotion that is evoked from the political battles, right? And our Constitution was not written so that people could be easily thrown out of office or easily overturned with power. I don't know if that was a
Freudian.
Freudian there, evilly,
Yeah. Yeah, I was
but
thinking the same thing.
the
And
same thing, right? So
yeah.
our Constitution does not provide a procedure for political coup. That's why there are essential checks and balances at every stage.
And so a lot of people who are commenters on this situation, they seem like they're very eager for this to enact the 25th Amendment and just throw President Biden out. But as you've mentioned, I think on Twitter, or sorry, X, I act like a boomer sometimes. And so on X, you've mentioned that he's only got a few months left. Going through this whole process really doesn't affect much. He's a lame duck at this point.
Yes.
Will, if we were to, if say Congress was to enact the 25th Amendment, go through this whole process, would it really change anything?
No, it wouldn't change anything. And I think with the contention that we have between the parties in the houses, we would not get a decision. I mean, for Pete's sakes, they couldn't impeach Mayorkas. I don't really understand how that couldn't happen.
Yeah.
But if they can't impeach Mayorkas, they're not going to invoke the 25th Amendment. Now, you have to remember, as evil and as wicked as this sounds, political parties operate in majority based on their own best interests. And political parties are also very, very vindictive. And the one thing that we can be guaranteed through the way we have really seized on this political party duopoly, and the parties know this, that, there's a Democrat in office today, there'll be a Republican in office tomorrow. All you have to do is go to Wikipedia and look at the list of presidents over time, and you see
Mm.
Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. So regardless of how long a Republican the party has held office, there will always be a Democrat. And these parties keep in mind that what they push and use against the opposing party will likely come back at them with a vengeance. So the Republicans will mostly, because the Democrats are not as motivated by fear of retribution from the other party, because the Republicans are very, well, I don't know, feckless. So the Republicans, however, understand the vindictive nature of the Democratic Party,
Sure.
and they are more hesitant to invoke this than even the Democrats would be.
So if the Republicans were to try to push this through, and if Trump was to be elected, we could count on the Democrats pulling this almost every 6 months. So
Yeah, attempting something like it, right? I mean, they're
yeah,
already pushing the narrative that he's too old,
they were
is
pushing.
which is
They were
very
pushing.
ironic, right?
Yeah.
They just want to take that. Remember, parties are not about facts. They're not, and this is Republican too, so let's just
Mhm.
be fair.
Yeah.
They're not really about facts and circumstances. They're more about contention and conflict. So you got Kamala Harris, who is a female and younger
Mhm.
and brown skinned, and then
Mhm.
you have Trump, who is an old white guy, right?
Yeah.
So you're not going to hear from the Democrat Party about any of the actual factual traits about Kamala Harris. You're going to hear about the fact that Donald Trump's an old white guy. Now,
Mhm.
you're not going to hear any, real facts about Kamala either from the Republican Party. You're going to hear that she, well, maybe it is a fact that she's inarticulate, but you're going to hear those conflicts and differences and not really about records. I
Yeah.
would love to see the Republican Party seize on the fact that Kamala Harris actually, was abusive to the justice system when she was a prosecutor, when she was the DA and the AG. I mean, it's just, as
There's
a
a lot.
former prosecutor, I'm very offended at the way she ran her positions.
Yeah, and there's a lot of evidence for that, and
Mhm.
there's more than enough reason for the Republicans to run those types of ads, but
Right.
they seem to be afraid to do that. I
Yeah.
don't always understand why the Republicans are afraid to run ads. Democrats don't seem to be afraid to say anything. So we're always afraid of being impolite, and I don't always understand that impulse. So on the 12th Amendment, moving forward, I'll pull it up. So that's a different thing. People have been talking about vice president and president. If, say, uh, Kamala Harris becomes president because of something that happens to President Biden, say he passes away in office, they would want to move. How would she elect someone as nominate someone as vice president? And you've talked about the fact that she really doesn't have to. And I
Right.
think people need to understand that.
Yeah, so there's two important factors, especially this late in Biden's presidency. Remember, he's only got a few months left. He's a lame duck anyway. So if something were to happen to Joe Biden and Kamala were to be president, then there's a lot of talk about who she would pick to be vice president. Well, the 12th Amendment establishes that she doesn't get to pick who's vice president.
Mhm.
She merely selects a nominee. The nominee must be placed by a majority of both the House and the Senate again. So remember, our government is set up for essential checks and balances, so that one person or one body of people cannot just simply engage in these political coups. And so we have a situation now where the president of the United States doesn't get, or the vice president of the United States doesn't get picked by Kamala. Kamala nominates, and the House and the Senate then confirm. Now, there have been 18 presidents throughout our history who have had no vice president for a short and even a long period of time. So the vice president is not really an essential position at this point in the game. And what we need to understand is, once again, because this requires a majority vote of both the House and the Senate, then what you have is a situation where it's not likely to happen before January. It's not likely to happen before November.
So it doesn't really affect the presidency, it doesn't affect the nation. I know
No.
that the vice president has a role as she, sorry, she or he, oh, I'm forgetting the role, but they act as the pro tempore, pro
Yeah,
tempore.
so what it is when there's a tie in the
Hmm,
Senate
thank you.
vote,
Yeah.
because we have two senators for each state, which is standard across the board. You're always going to have an even number. So
Mhm.
if it were to happen that there were a tie in the Senate, the vice president then acts as the tiebreaker. But you're not
Yeah.
going to have any major legislation passed between now and January either, because there's no, I mean, there's no motivation for the president to sign anything because
Mhm.
he's a lame duck.
Or
And
if she becomes president, there's no motivation for her to really sign anything. So,
no, and there's because you don't have a super majority in both the House and the Senate, because the president is not of the president and the majority in both houses is not the same party, right?
mhm.
It's not likely that laws will be fast tracked anyway.
Okay. So we have a unique situation in our government right now, and it's a lot of people are trying to guess and they're trying to make these decisions about what should happen, but a lot of the decisions that they're making are based on faulty information, and I
Right.
want and
Based on
misunderstand.
emotion, really.
Yeah, it
And
is.
the problem is with social media, you have a lot of conservative social media influencers that are sadly not concerned about facts and truth. They're more concerned about ramping up their base and getting clicks and likes and shares. And really, my prayer on in social media is to use it as a tool to teach people truth, so
Mhm.
that we can actually get to real solutions. What the social media influencers are doing when they engage in all of this half truths and no truths is really take away our motivation and our resources towards real practical constitutional solutions.
Yeah, I see a lot of we'll talk about conservative values, but those values don't always line up with constitutional values. The
Yeah.
values are thrown out there as catchwords, catchphrases that will drag in a conservative audience, but
Hmm.
it doesn't really bring in constitutional, God-given natural rights.
Right.
And one of the things I really enjoyed about your speech when you came to Springfield, it was you shifted the perspective. You shifted the perspective from um, this idea that everything was about conservative ideas to protecting our constitutional rights. And
Right.
so I don't know if I have it right next to me, but I read your book, Sovereign Duty.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. And when you were towards the end and you were talking about speaking to the young group of people, and you said that you broke down and you cried. And I'm not trying to get an emotional response, but
Yeah, yeah.
I, I'm not looking for that. But you realize that what we haven't done is communicated clearly to this generation or to the next generation their responsibility or our responsibility about
Right.
what they really need to have, the
Right.
knowledge they need to have. And your book really does help with that. And
Thank you.
you're welcome. I really enjoyed reading it. But I think we're missing that key piece because when I try to talk to people and I try to express some of those same ideas in my work, they get mad at me because I won't support the conservative values
Yeah.
and I want to support the constitutional values. How do
Yeah.
you work with that?
Go, no, go. Yeah, I would say it's quite unfortunate that conservative values are not the same as constitutional values, because they started off very, on the same path.
Mm,
But whenever we start relying on parties instead of principles, then we start getting into what we call tribalistic views. and tribalistic emotions. We get drawn into that my team versus your team, when it's really all about God-given rights. It's about what we have are as inalienable rights bestowed upon us by our Creator. That's why the Declaration of Independence starts off the way it does. It starts off not just randomly telling a story, but laying a foundation that
Mhm.
it is absolutely true and undeniable that we are the holders of the rights, and that the only purpose of government is to secure those rights, and government's only job is to govern according to our consent, which is written in our constitutions. And the sad thing is, we stopped teaching the truth about our constitutional republic, about how our governments are supposed to work, about how we're supposed to properly apply the Constitution around 1830.
I
So
read,
most people think that they know a lot about the Constitution by reading it, and they simply don't, because we don't teach it properly.
yeah, I read your articles about school choice yesterday. And I've been working on school choice too. School choice is one of those conservative value issues. And so we talk about it, and it's amazing when, say, in Missouri, we had a law go through called SB 727, and everybody was pushing it. The reps were coming home and bragging about how they got it passed and how this was going to change DESE and limit the power of DESE. And this was going to this was going to make it easier for homeschoolers to get government money. And so it would make them better equipped to change the world through conservative values. And when you look at it, and I'm a little flamboyant with my language, so you'll have to excuse me, but I said that if you give them
Passion is
government,
good.
yeah, well, if you give, I'm colorful. So if you give them government subsidies, you're turning the conservative homeschool moms into welfare queens. And so if you're doing that, then you're making them basically dependent upon this
Mhm.
subsidy, and they will become your new lobbyists, going back to the government asking for more money in the future, making the lobbyists who are now there obsolete so they can go on and do other things and ask for more money. And
Mm.
so and the heat I got, I've been blacklisted. I'm not allowed to interview people anymore. So it's been fun. And so that kind of conservative value versus a constitutional value of, we shouldn't be bringing we shouldn't be, help me out, we shouldn't be
Well,
allowing,
here,
go ahead.
conservative values should be focused on individual rights,
Yeah.
smaller government, and less intrusion of government into your private life. What these vouchers and subsidies to homeschool parents actually do is it actually, as you laid out that scenario, sets up a scenario where the parents will now have to choose the curriculum that the government is mandating in order to keep the money. That's the way that's the way it will go. That's, by the way, the whole motivation behind those who are really behind the curtain pulling all the strings. I believe that there are a lot of representatives out there who are completely oblivious of this intended consequence. I believe that they think they're doing a great thing, but they don't hold all the information, they don't hold all the facts, and they lack constitutional understanding and foresight on how government works
Yeah.
and will work. Unfortunately, here in Florida, we already had some of this play out. We were allowed to have what they call corporate scholarships. Private corporations were actually giving scholarships to private schools. And it
Hmm.
hasn't hit the homeschool community yet in Florida yet, because the homeschool community has been really guarded. We've held back the tide of government funding for quite some time, although there are a lot of people who lack this information. So
Sure.
it's starting to creep in. But the corporate scholarships had private corporations giving large sums of money to private schools, some of them Christian schools,
Mm.
to fund the education for special needs children.
That's
And what
exactly what's going on here in Missouri.
Yeah, and so what happened? Well, I can tell you the future because we already have that played out here in Florida. So what happened was you had a lot of private schools and unfortunately Christian schools that were Christian in name only. And
Mm.
they were taking these large sums of money for special needs students and then using that money not to make a tailored education for that child's special needs, but to simply run the school and fund everything in the school and then just neglecting the special needs, inadequately meeting the special needs of the children.
Yeah.
And people in the state of Florida got outraged. Now, this is back before 2005.
Okay.
So we have this long history. There's almost 20 years of history now in the state of Florida. The people got outraged and started screaming at the legislators to fix this problem. Now, the legislators said, we can't fix this problem. This is private money going into private schools.
Mm.
We don't have any attachment to this. Well, the outrage got so big and the lobbying on it got so big that the legislators said, look, here's what we can do. We can pass a legislation that says if you're using money to teach special needs children because the state has an interest in the needs of special needs children and they need to be protected and they need to be guarded against these evildoers, right?
Sure. Yeah.
What we'll do is we'll pass a piece of legislation that says the state of Florida has the authority to audit a private school that accepts this money for special needs children.
Yeah.
So we had this legislation that went through that said, okay, the state of Florida now has the authority to audit schools that take corporate scholarships, right?
Mhm.
And so that was the nose of the camel in the tent, and it was all well intentioned by the people who didn't know any better, and then it allowed those who had controlling evil intentions over private schools to get the government's claws in.
Yeah.
In 2007, the Florida legislature passed a law called the Ethics in Education Act. The Ethics in Education Act said that every public school, every charter school, which is always government funded,
Yeah.
and any private school that took corporate funds, right? The corporate scholarships that now had names on them. So if you
Mhm.
take these corporate scholarships that are for children in needs, you now must have an ethics in education policy.
Yeah.
Now, it seemed very innocuous on the forefront because they said you just simply have to have an ethics in education policy, but it didn't outline what it was supposed to be. What happened then was the Department of Education in Florida wrote an ethics in education policy and then sent it out to all the private schools with this letter. Now, I know because I'm an attorney that specifically deals in representation of Christian schools and churches. I do that all over the country. And so
Mhm.
I was really involved in this. A bunch of schools that we were helping got this letter from the Florida Department of Education saying, we realize this new law is confusing. You're receiving these corporate scholarships for your special needs students. We want to make life easier for you, and you don't have to go hire an attorney to understand this legislature, write your policy. Here is a policy that we've already written. All you have to do is sign on the dotted line, and it
Yeah.
becomes yours. Well, these policies said that you cannot discriminate in hiring practices based on sexual orientation. You cannot interfere with a child's self-development of their personality. We now all, in 2007, we didn't really understand the depth of what that meant. But here we
Yeah,
are in 2024. We know what that means, that you can't interfere with a child's
exactly.
personality
Yeah.
development, right? Not only that, it said that according to this policy, you cannot teach from a single source educational perspective. Meaning, if you have a Christian school, you cannot teach the Bible is the source of truth. You cannot teach simply creationism. And then it also requires private schools to report to a state database the names of their teachers who violate any one of these, myriad of regulations that they've put into place, all to protect LGBTQ, all to eliminate religious liberty, all to eliminate any religious aspect of education in a Christian school, mind you. This is being
Yeah.
applied in Christian schools to keep that money. And
And
so
this
in
is,
2007, that happened in the state of Florida,
mhm.
and that is coming to Missouri if you're not careful.
It already is in many ways. The DESE has implemented rules and regulations for what it's supposed to teach for physical education, but that physical education is a Trojan horse for
Yes.
getting in transsexual education, for LGBT education, things
Well,
like
the
that.
entire government funding of your private school and of your homeschool is a Trojan horse. And I just
Mhm.
want to speak directly to homeschool parents right now,
Sure.
because here's the key. Remember in what we saw play out in the state of Florida about how the misuse of the money allowed the state to come in and audit the entire school. You take this money as a homeschool parent into your general bank account, you are now setting up the scenario where the state can come in and audit your entire financial system of your home, your private money. Audit that money to make sure you're spending what they've given you properly on education. This is complete rule and governance over your private funds, unless you say no, we don't want them. The problem is, if you've already taken them, they can go back. And what happened during COVID, when they started auditing people who took the COVID money, you go back and they make you pay back what they've already given you with penalties and interests. This is
Yeah.
a terrible, terrible thing. And every homeschool parent should never, ever, ever take this money.
Even if you don't take the money, they added regulations to the regular homeschool parents. So I have one last question. I know we just ran over time. I
No,
apologize.
we're good. We're good.
But I want to know, do you think there's any way for our country to get out of the hole we're in to
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I have never been more encouraged about the future of America than I am now. And I know that sounds strange because things are looking really grim, but let me remind you what Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence. He said, "People will suffer evil as long as evil is sufferable." So, what we have to really get to the point of as a culture is that we're not willing to suffer this anymore. When we're no longer willing to suffer what the vast, expansive, growing government that we have allowed to exist, then we'll start taking the tools that our founders put into our hands. We'll start employing them as a people. We'll stop looking for political saviors. We'll stop looking to the president to fix all our problems. We'll stop looking to Congress to fix all our problems. And we'll be the government of the people that we are supposed to be. I have hope for America because we're different than any other nation on the planet. We are founded on liberty. And that is in us, in our very American DNA. And we cannot allow it to suffer much longer.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Hall or KrisAnne Hall. I appreciate you
Thank
coming
you.
in and doing the interview very much. Any last thoughts?
No, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. And as you know, I have a special interest in Missouri. I was born and raised in St. Louis. My heart is still there. I'm still a show me girl through and through. So my thoughts, my prayers, my efforts are engaged for the state of Missouri and the people of Missouri. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to actually reach out to the people of Missouri and hopefully open some eyes and open some doors and set some people free from the miseducation and misinformation that has been sowed in our society.
Well, I think that's great because Missouri is one of those states that it's pivotal in winning
Yeah,
back our freedom. So thank you,
absolutely.
thank you so much.